The laughter started as a whisper in the back rows of Harvard's Grand Debate Hall, then grew into a wave of cruel amusement that crashed over Jasmine like ice water. She stood frozen at the podium, her second-hand blazer suddenly feeling too tight, too cheap, too obvious against the sea of designer suits surrounding her. The ornate ceiling of the historic hall seemed to press down on her shoulders as hundreds of eyes dissected every detail of her appearance. Her shoes, polished but worn at the heels. Her hair, carefully styled but lacking the expensive treatments that gave her competitors their glossy perfection. Even her notes, written on regular notebook paper instead of the cream-colored cardstock that seemed to be the unspoken standard here. "Is this some kind of charity case?" someone whispered loud enough for her to hear. "Did they let in the cleaning lady by mistake?" came another voice, followed by stifled giggles. Jasmine's hands trembled as she gripped the sides of the podium. This was supposed to be her moment. After months of preparation, after winning the state championship back in Detroit, after her mother worked double shifts to pay for the bus ticket to Boston, this was supposed to be where she proved that talent mattered more than money. Instead, she felt like she was drowning in front of an audience that had already decided she didn't belong. The head judge, a stern woman with silver hair pulled back in a perfect bun, cleared her throat. "Miss Johnson, you may begin your opening statement." But Jasmine couldn't speak. The words she had practiced 1,000 times in her tiny bedroom back home seemed to evaporate in the face of such open mockery. She looked out at the crowd and saw smirks on faces that had never known hunger, never worried about keeping the lights on, never had to choose between buying school supplies or groceries. "Take your time," the judge said, but there was impatience in her voice that made it clear time was not something Jasmine would be given freely here. In the third row, a young man with perfectly styled blonde hair leaned over to his teammate. "This is going to be embarrassing. How did someone like her even get invited?" His companion, a girl with diamond earrings that probably cost more than Jasmine's entire wardrobe, shrugged. "Diversity quota probably. Harvard needs to look good in the newspapers." The words hit Jasmine like physical blows. She had earned her place here. She had beaten opponents who had trained their entire lives for this moment. She had studied until her eyes burned and practiced until her voice went hoarse. But none of that mattered to these people who saw only her threadbare blazer and her Detroit address. Finally, she found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. "The topic of today's debate is whether economic inequality undermines democratic institutions." She paused, trying to gather strength. "I stand before you as living proof that it does." The laughter that followed was not kind. It was the sound of privilege protecting itself, of doors slamming shut before she could even try to open them. Jasmine felt heat rise in her cheeks as she realized that her personal story, the one she had thought would give her an advantage, had instead made her a target. "How original," someone called out. "The poor girl is going to lecture us about being poor." The head judge banged her gavel. "Order in the hall. Miss Johnson, please continue." But Jasmine's mind went blank. All her preparation, all her dreams of showing these people what real intelligence looked like when it wasn't wrapped in expensive packaging, crumbled under the weight of their contempt. She stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, listening to the whispers and giggles that seemed to grow louder with each passing moment. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the auditorium, a single voice cut through the mockery. "Let her speak." Jasmine looked up to see a young man with kind eyes and dark hair standing up from his seat. He wasn't looking at her with pity or amusement, but with something she hadn't expected to find in this place: respect. "Everyone deserves to be heard," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. "That's what debate is supposed to be about." The room fell silent for a moment, and in that silence, Jasmine found something she had almost lost: her anger. Not the destructive kind that burned everything in its path, but the focused kind that had gotten her out of the projects and into college. The kind that had made her study when her friends were partying, that had made her practice speeches in the mirror when she could have been watching television. She straightened her shoulders and looked directly at the blonde boy in the third row who had started the cruel whispers. "You want to know how I got here? I'll tell you exactly how I got here." Her voice was stronger now, carrying the rhythm and power that had won her competitions back home. "I got here by studying in a library with broken air conditioning in the summer and no heat in the winter. I got here by working 3 jobs to pay for college while my classmates were going to parties. I got here by believing that in America, it doesn't matter where you come from if you're willing to work hard enough." The laughter had stopped now. Even the whispers had died away as Jasmine's words filled the space with a different kind of energy. "But looking at all of you right now," she continued, her eyes sweeping across the sea of expensive suits and designer accessories, "I'm starting to think I was wrong. I'm starting to think that some of you have never had to prove you belong anywhere, because you were born belonging. The head judge was watching her intently now, no longer impatient but genuinely interested in what this unexpected competitor might say next. So yes, Jasmine said, her voice rising with passion, I am going to lecture you about economic inequality. Because some of you have never seen it up close. Some of you have never had to choose between paying rent and eating. Some of you have never had your mother work 16-hour days just so you could have a chance at a better life. She paused, letting her words sink in, then delivered the line that would later be quoted in newspapers across the country. You think my background is a disadvantage. I think it's the reason I'm going to win. The silence that followed was different from the mockery that had greeted her arrival. This was the silence of people who had just realized they might have underestimated their opponent. In that moment, Jasmine felt the shift in the room's energy, the first crack in the wall of privilege that had seemed so impenetrable just minutes before. The young man who had defended her was still standing, and when their eyes met across the crowded auditorium, he smiled. Not the condescending smile she had grown used to, but a genuine expression of admiration for someone who had just turned what should have been a moment of defeat into a declaration of war. Jasmine smiled back, then turned to face the judges. Now, if you're ready to hear what I actually came here to say, I'd like to begin my formal presentation. The head judge nodded, and for the first time since arriving at Harvard, Jasmine felt like she might actually have a chance. 3 months earlier, Jasmine Johnson had been stocking shelves at Murphy's Corner Market in Detroit when her phone buzzed with a text that would change her life. She almost didn't check it, her hands covered in price stickers and her mind focused on getting through her shift so she could make it to her evening classes on time. But something made her glance at the screen, and when she saw the message from her debate coach, her heart nearly stopped. Jasmine, you've been invited to the Harvard Invitational. Full scholarship covered by an anonymous donor. This is it, kid. This is your shot. She dropped the box of cereal she was holding, sending colorful boxes scattering across the linoleum floor. Mrs. Murphy, the store owner, looked up from her register with concern. Everything okay, honey? Jasmine couldn't speak. She just stared at her phone, reading the message over and over again. The Harvard Invitational was the most prestigious high school debate tournament in the country. Winners got full scholarships to Ivy League schools. It was the kind of opportunity that kids like her weren't supposed to get. I think, she finally managed to say, I think I just got invited to Harvard. Mrs. Murphy hurried over, her weathered face breaking into a wide smile as Jasmine showed her the message. Oh my goodness, child. This is wonderful. You have to call your mother right now. But Jasmine hesitated. Her mother, Carmen, was working her second job at the hospital, cleaning floors and emptying trash cans for minimum wage. She wouldn't be home until after midnight, exhausted and barely able to keep her eyes open. How could Jasmine tell her that this opportunity existed when they both knew it would mean expenses they couldn't afford? The tournament was in 2 months, and even with the scholarship covering entry fees, there would be travel costs, hotel rooms, meals in a city where everything cost more than they made in a week. That night, Jasmine sat in the small kitchen of their apartment, listening to the sounds of sirens and music from the street below. Their building wasn't in the worst part of Detroit, but it wasn't good either. The walls were thin, the plumbing was unreliable, and the heating system had given up completely last winter. But it was home, and it was what her mother could afford on her 2 jobs. When Carmen finally walked through the door at 12:30 a.m., her uniform wrinkled and her feet swollen from standing all day, Jasmine was still awake, homework spread across the kitchen table. Baby, you should be sleeping, Carmen said, dropping her purse and kicking off her shoes with a sigh of relief. Mama, I need to tell you something. Carmen's tired eyes immediately sharpened with concern. In their house, late-night conversations usually meant problems. Bills that couldn't be paid, emergencies that required money they didn't have, opportunities that were just out of reach. Jasmine showed her the text message, watching as her mother's expression shifted from worry to amazement to something that looked almost like fear. Harvard, Carmen whispered, sinking into the chair across from her daughter. My baby got invited to Harvard. It's just a tournament, Mama. But if I win, if I even place well, it could mean scholarship offers. Real ones. Full rides to schools I never thought I could afford. Carmen was quiet for a long moment, staring at the phone screen. Jasmine knew what she was thinking. They had been through this before with other opportunities. The summer program that required a laptop they couldn't buy. The debate camp that would have been perfect but cost more than their monthly rent. The SAT prep course that might have raised Jasmine's scores but was completely out of their budget. How much? Carmen finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know yet. Maybe a few $100s for travel and food. The tournament itself is covered. Carmen nodded slowly, then stood up and walked to the small window that looked out over their neighborhood. Jasmine watched her mother's reflection in the glass, seeing the exhaustion in her shoulders, the weight of years of sacrifice and struggle. "When I was your age," Carmen said, not turning around, "I was pregnant with you and dropping out of high school. I promised myself then that you would have every chance I never got. Every door I couldn't open would be wide open for you." She turned back to face Jasmine, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "We'll figure out the money. I'll pick up extra shifts, maybe ask Mrs. Patterson if she needs help with her cleaning business on weekends. This is your chance, baby. We're not going to let money stop you from taking it." Over the next 2 months, Carmen worked herself to exhaustion. She took on extra shifts at both her jobs, cleaned houses on weekends, and even sold her one piece of good jewelry, a ring that had belonged to Jasmine's grandmother. She never complained, never made Jasmine feel guilty for the sacrifices she was making. Instead, she turned their small apartment into a debate preparation center. Every night after work, no matter how tired she was, Carmen would sit and listen to Jasmine practice her arguments. She didn't understand all the complex topics, but she understood passion and determination. She would time Jasmine's speeches, ask the questions that occurred to her as a regular person hearing these arguments, and push her daughter to explain things more clearly. "If you can't make me understand it," Carmen would say, "how are you going to convince those fancy judges?" Jasmine's debate coach, Mr. Rodriguez, worked with her 3 times a week at the community center. The building was old and falling apart, with broken windows covered by plywood and a heating system that worked sporadically at best. But it had a small room with folding chairs where the debate team met, and it was free. "The kids you're going up against have been preparing for this their whole lives," Mr. Rodriguez told her during one particularly intense practice session. "They've had private tutors, expensive camps, parents who were debate champions themselves. But you have something they don't have." "What's that?" Jasmine asked, wiping sweat from her forehead despite the cold in the room. "You have hunger. You have the kind of motivation that comes from knowing this is your one shot. They're expecting to win because they always have. You're planning to win because you have to." The night before leaving for Harvard, Jasmine couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, listening to her mother moving around in the kitchen, packing snacks for the bus ride because airplane tickets were too expensive. Carmen had managed to save enough money for a Greyhound ticket to Boston and 2 nights in a cheap motel near the university. It had cost her everything she had, plus money borrowed from friends and family members who could barely afford to help. At 5 a.m., Carmen knocked softly on Jasmine's door. "Time to go, baby." They walked to the bus station in the dark, carrying Jasmine's small suitcase and a bag of sandwiches and fruit that would have to last the entire trip. At the station, surrounded by the smell of diesel fuel and the sound of engines rumbling to life, Carmen pulled her daughter close. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered into Jasmine's hair. "No matter what happens, you remember that you earned this. You belong there just as much as anyone else." Jasmine held on tight, breathing in her mother's familiar scent of hospital soap and the vanilla lotion she used every night. "What if I fail?" "Then you fail trying. That's more than most people ever do." Carmen pulled back and looked into her daughter's eyes. "But you're not going to fail. You're my daughter and we don't give up. Ever." The bus ride to Boston took 18 hours, with stops in cities Jasmine had never seen. She used the time to review her notes, practice her arguments in whispers, and think about everything her mother had sacrificed to make this possible. By the time the bus pulled into South Station, she was exhausted but determined. Walking through Harvard's campus for the first time was like entering a different world. The buildings were older than anything in Detroit, made of red brick and covered with ivy. Students walked across manicured lawns carrying books that probably cost more than Jasmine's mother made in a week. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they belonged, moving with the confidence that came from never having their right to be somewhere questioned. But as Jasmine made her way to the registration table for the debate tournament, she carried with her the voices of everyone who had believed in her. Her mother's determination, Mr. Rodriguez's tough coaching, Mrs. Murphy's encouragement, and her own fierce desire to prove that talent and hard work could overcome any disadvantage. She didn't know yet that in a few hours she would be standing on that stage facing the mockery of her competitors. She didn't know that her worn blazer and second-hand shoes would make her a target for cruel laughter. All she knew was that she had made it this far against all odds, and she wasn't going to let anyone make her feel like she didn't deserve to be there. As she signed in for the tournament, the volunteer at the registration table looked at her paperwork and raised an eyebrow. "Detroit Public Schools? That's unusual for this tournament. Jasmine met her gaze steadily. I'm looking forward to showing everyone what Detroit can do. The volunteer smiled, but it was the kind of smile that said she didn't expect much. That was fine with Jasmine. She had been underestimated her entire life. It was exactly where she did her best work. The Marriott hotel where Jasmine was staying felt like a palace compared to her apartment back home, but she knew it was probably the cheapest accommodation her mother could find. The carpet was worn in places and the air conditioning made strange noises, but it had a desk where she could spread out her materials and a mirror where she could practice her presentations. She had arrived in Boston 3 days before the tournament, using every moment to prepare. While other competitors were probably touring the city or socializing at expensive restaurants, Jasmine was in her room, transforming herself into the debater she needed to be. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "How are you feeling, baby? Remember, you belong there." Jasmine smiled and typed back, "Nervous but ready. Love you, mama." She didn't tell her mother about the stares she'd gotten in the hotel lobby, or the way the other debaters had looked right through her when she tried to introduce herself in the elevator. She didn't mention that her stomach was tied in knots every time she thought about standing up in front of Harvard's judges and trying to prove herself. Instead, she focused on what she could control, her preparation. Every morning she woke up at 6 a.m. and went for a run along the Charles River. The rhythm of her feet on the pavement helped calm her nerves and clear her mind. She would run past the Harvard rowing team practicing on the water, past joggers in expensive athletic wear, past a world that seemed effortlessly privileged. But running had always been her meditation, her way of finding strength in her own body and determination. After her run, she would shower and then spend hours at the small desk in her room, reviewing her research and refining her arguments. The debate topic was economic inequality and democratic institutions, and while other competitors probably saw it as an abstract academic exercise, for Jasmine it was her life story. She had statistics about poverty rates, unemployment figures, and educational disparities memorized. But more than that, she had real experience. She knew what it felt like to watch her mother choose between paying the electric bill and buying groceries. She knew the weight of being the first person in her family to even dream of college. She understood, in a way that her wealthy competitors never could, how economic inequality didn't just affect bank accounts but shaped every aspect of a person's life. On her second day in Boston, she decided to visit Harvard's campus and get familiar with the building where the tournament would take place. Walking through Harvard Yard, she felt the weight of centuries of tradition and privilege. Every brick seemed to whisper about the important people who had walked these paths, the decisions that had been made in these halls, the power that had been wielded from these buildings. The debate hall was in a building called Lowell House, a grand structure with tall windows and ornate details that spoke of serious money and serious tradition. Jasmine stood outside for a long time, looking up at the building where she would either prove herself or crash and burn in front of hundreds of people. Intimidating, isn't it? She turned to see a young man about her age, with kind eyes and dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it. He was carrying a stack of books and wearing a Harvard sweatshirt that looked like it had been through many wash cycles. "Are you competing in the debate tournament?" he asked. Jasmine nodded, suddenly self-conscious about her Detroit Lions t-shirt and bargain jeans. "Yeah. Just trying to get familiar with the space." "I'm Ryan," he said, shifting his books to one arm so he could extend his hand. "I'm not competing, but I'll be judging some of the preliminary rounds." "Are you nervous?" "Terrified," Jasmine admitted, then immediately wondered why she'd been so honest with a complete stranger. Ryan smiled, and it was a real smile, not the polite but distant expression she'd gotten used to from other Harvard students. "Good. The people who aren't nervous are usually the ones who should be. What's your name?" "Jasmine. Jasmine Johnson." "Well, Jasmine Johnson, would you like me to show you around the debate hall? I volunteer here a lot, so I know all the tricks for staying calm in that room." For the next hour, Ryan gave her a tour of the building, pointing out where the bathrooms were, which water fountains worked best, and how the acoustics changed depending on where you stood in the hall. But more than that, he treated her like she belonged there. He didn't ask where she was from or how she'd gotten invited. He didn't look at her clothes or her shoes with judgment. He just talked to her like she was another serious competitor worthy of respect. "The thing about this room," he said as they stood on the stage where she would soon be presenting, "is that it's designed to be intimidating. All that dark wood and those portraits of dead white guys staring down at you. But here's the secret, they're just decorations. The only thing that matters is what you have to say and how well you say it." "Easy for you to say," Jasmine replied. "You go to Harvard. This is your world." Ryan was quiet for a moment, looking out at the empty seats. Actually, I grew up in a trailer park in Ohio. My dad worked construction when he could find work and my mom cleaned houses. I'm here on a full scholarship, and half the time I still feel like I'm pretending to belong. Jasmine looked at him with new eyes. In his Harvard sweatshirt and with his easy confidence, she had assumed he was just another privileged kid playing at being helpful. But now she could see something else in his expression, a recognition of what it felt like to be the outsider trying to prove yourself in a world that wasn't built for people like you. How do you do it? She asked. How do you walk into rooms full of people who have everything you never had and still believe you deserve to be there? Some days I don't, Ryan admitted. Some days I want to pack up and go home and work construction with my dad. But then I remember that I'm not just here for me. I'm here for every kid who grew up like I did, who thought places like this were for other people. Every time I succeed here, I'm proving that it's possible. They talked for another hour, sitting in the debate hall as the afternoon light streamed through the tall windows. Ryan told her about his first year at Harvard, how overwhelming it had been, how many times he'd felt like giving up. Jasmine told him about Detroit, about her mother's sacrifices, about the community center where she'd learned to debate. Your background isn't a weakness, Ryan said as they finally prepared to leave. It's your strength. These other kids have been taught to debate about inequality like it's a theoretical problem. You've lived it. You understand it in a way they never will. That's going to make your arguments more powerful, more real. What if they don't want to hear about real inequality? Jasmine asked. What if they just want academic theories and fancy quotes? Then you give them both, Ryan said firmly. You hit them with the statistics and the theory, but you also hit them with the truth. Make them understand that this isn't just an intellectual exercise. Make them see that the inequality they're debating about has a face, and that face is yours. That evening, back in her hotel room, Jasmine worked on revising her opening statement. She had been planning to keep it academic, to try to sound like what she thought a Harvard-worthy debater should sound like. But Ryan's words had changed her perspective. Instead of hiding her background, she would lead with it. Instead of apologizing for where she came from, she would use it as her weapon. She called her mother that night and told her about meeting Ryan, about his advice, about the new direction her preparation was taking. Sounds like you found yourself an ally, Carmen said. That's good, baby. Everyone needs someone in their corner. Mama, what if I get up there and they don't take me seriously? What if they just see me as some charity case who doesn't belong? Then you make them see different, Carmen replied, her voice strong despite the exhaustion Jasmine could hear in it. You make them see that you didn't get there by charity. You got there by being better than they are, by working harder than they ever had to work. And if they still don't see it, then that's their loss, not yours. The night before the tournament, Jasmine could barely sleep. She kept going over her arguments, practicing her delivery, imagining different scenarios and how she would respond to them. She thought about all the people who were counting on her. Her mother, who had worked herself to exhaustion to make this possible. Mr. Rodriguez, who had believed in her when she was just another kid from the projects. Mrs. Murphy, who had cheered when she got the invitation. But most of all, she thought about the girl she had been just a few years ago, the one who had thought places like Harvard were for other people, who had never imagined that someone like her could compete on this level. Tomorrow she would either prove that girl wrong or validate every doubt she'd ever had about her own worth. At 3 a.m. she finally gave up on sleep and went to the window. Boston spread out below her, a city full of opportunities and obstacles, dreams and disappointments. Somewhere out there, her competitors were probably sleeping peacefully in their expensive hotels, confident in their preparation and their right to be here. But Jasmine had something they didn't have, the absolute certainty that this was her only shot. There would be no second chances, no family connections to smooth the way if she failed, no trust fund to fall back on if things didn't work out. Everything she had ever wanted, everything her mother had ever sacrificed for, came down to the next few days. She was as ready as she would ever be. The morning of the tournament, Jasmine woke up before her alarm, her heart already racing with anticipation. She had barely slept, but adrenaline coursed through her veins like caffeine. This was it. Everything she had worked for, everything her mother had sacrificed for, came down to today. She got dressed carefully, putting on her best blazer, the one she'd bought at a consignment shop and had tailored to fit her properly. It wasn't expensive, but it was clean and professional, and it made her feel like she could belong in the same room as her competitors. She looked at herself in the hotel mirror, practicing her opening lines one more time. You can do this, she told her reflection. You belong here. The registration area was buzzing with activity when she arrived. Students from elite prep schools clustered together, their expensive suits and confident laughter filling the space. Jasmine recognized some of them from online debate forums, kids who had been competing in national tournaments since middle school, whose parents had hired professional coaches and paid for intensive summer programs. She picked up her schedule and saw that her first round was against someone named Victoria Sterling from Phillips Academy. Jasmine didn't know much about her opponent, but the fact that she was from one of the most exclusive prep schools in the country told her everything she needed to know. The debate hall looked even more imposing, filled with people than it had when she'd visited with Ryan. Every seat was occupied, and the room hummed with the energy of serious competition. Jasmine found her assigned seat and tried to calm her nerves by reviewing her notes one more time. "Excuse me, are you Jasmine Johnson?" She looked up to see a woman in her 50s with perfectly styled silver hair and an expensive-looking suit. Everything about her, from her posture to her confident smile, screamed privilege and authority. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Margaret Sterling, Victoria's mother. I wanted to introduce myself since our daughters will be competing against each other in the first round." Jasmine stood up and shook the woman's hand, noticing the large diamond ring and manicured nails. "Nice to meet you. Victoria has been looking forward to this tournament all year," Mrs. Sterling continued, her voice warm but with an underlying edge. "She's been preparing with her debate coach since last summer. Where did you say you were from again?" "Detroit," Jasmine replied, keeping her voice steady. "Oh, how interesting. And your parents? What do they do?" The question was asked innocently enough, but Jasmine could see the calculation behind it. This woman was sizing her up, trying to figure out if she was real competition or just a token participant. "My mother works at a hospital," Jasmine said, not mentioning that Carmen's job involved cleaning floors and emptying trash cans. "How nice. Well, may the best debater win." Mrs. Sterling's smile didn't reach her eyes as she walked away. 20 minutes later, Jasmine found herself standing at the podium facing Victoria Sterling, who looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine spread about successful young women. Her suit was perfectly tailored, her blonde hair was styled in a professional bob, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her right to be anywhere. The topic for the first round was, should wealth taxes be implemented to reduce inequality? Victoria, arguing against wealth taxes, went first. "Honorable judges," Victoria began, her voice clear and commanding, "wealth taxes represent a fundamental misunderstanding of how economic systems work. They punish success, discourage investment, and ultimately harm the very people they claim to help." Her argument was polished and well-researched, full of statistics about capital flight and economic growth. She spoke with the easy confidence of someone who had been trained from childhood to command attention and respect. When she finished, there was scattered applause from the audience. Then it was Jasmine's turn. She stood up slowly, taking a moment to look out at the crowd. She could see Mrs. Sterling in the third row, watching with the smug expression of someone who expected her daughter to win easily. She could see other parents and competitors, all waiting to see if the girl from Detroit could actually compete at this level. "Honorable judges," Jasmine began, her voice starting quietly but growing stronger with each word, "my opponent speaks about wealth taxes like they're an abstract policy debate. But for me, and for millions of Americans like me, inequality isn't abstract. It's personal." She paused, letting her words sink in, then continued with growing passion. "I grew up in a neighborhood where my mother worked 3 jobs just to keep our lights on. Where brilliant kids dropped out of school because they couldn't afford books. Where talent was wasted every day because opportunity was something that happened to other people, in other places." The room had grown quiet, the casual chatter and rustling papers stopping as people focused on her words. "My opponent talks about punishing success. But what about rewarding it? What about the single mothers who work 16-hour days but still can't afford to send their kids to college? What about the small business owners who innovate and create jobs but can't compete with corporations that pay no taxes? What about the teachers and nurses and firefighters who serve our communities but live paycheck to paycheck?" Jasmine's voice rose with emotion, but she kept her arguments sharp and focused. She had memorized statistics about wealth concentration, but she made them personal, connecting each number to a real human cost. "Wealth taxes aren't about punishment," she concluded, looking directly at Victoria. "They're about opportunity. They're about making sure that talent and hard work matter more than trust funds and connections. They're about giving every American child the same chance to succeed, regardless of what zip code they're born in." When she finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then slowly applause began. Not the polite smattering that had greeted Victoria, but real applause that built and sustained itself. Jasmine looked out at the audience and saw surprise on many faces, but also something else: respect. These people had come expecting to see her fail, to watch the charity case from Detroit crash and burn. Instead, they had heard something real, something that challenged their assumptions about who belonged in these elite spaces. During the rebuttal phase, Victoria struggled to respond to Jasmine's personal stories with her abstract economic theories. Her arguments sounded hollow when placed against Jasmine's lived experience and passionate delivery. When the judges announced their decision 20 minutes later, Jasmine could hardly believe what she was hearing. The winner of this round, representing Detroit Public Schools, Jasmine Johnson. The applause was louder this time, and Jasmine saw several people in the audience leaning forward in their seats, suddenly paying attention to the girl they had dismissed just an hour earlier. Victoria Sterling looked stunned, her perfect composure cracking for the first time. Her mother's face had gone pale, the smug confidence replaced by shock and something that looked almost like anger. But Jasmine barely noticed their reactions. She was floating on a cloud of disbelief and pride. She had done it. She had beaten one of the most privileged competitors in the tournament, and she had done it by being herself, by refusing to hide where she came from or apologize for her background. As she gathered her papers and prepared to leave the stage, she caught sight of Ryan in the judges' section. He was smiling broadly and gave her a subtle thumbs up. Seeing his proud expression made her victory feel even sweeter. "Congratulations," Victoria said stiffly as they passed each other. "That was unexpected." "Thank you," Jasmine replied graciously, though she could hear the resentment in her opponent's voice. Mrs. Sterling was waiting near the exit, her lips pressed into a thin line. As Jasmine walked past, the older woman spoke just loudly enough for her to hear. "Enjoy it while it lasts, dear. The real competition hasn't started yet." The comment stung, but Jasmine kept walking. She had learned long ago not to let other people's bitterness dim her own light. She had won her first round at Harvard, and nothing anyone said could take that away from her. In the hallway outside the debate hall, she pulled out her phone and called her mother. Carmen answered on the second ring, even though she was supposed to be working. "Baby? How did it go?" "I won, Mama," Jasmine said, her voice breaking with emotion. "I actually won." The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long that Jasmine wondered if the call had dropped. Then she heard her mother crying. "I'm so proud of you," Carmen whispered. "So proud I can't even find the words." "I was so scared up there at first," Jasmine admitted. "But then I remembered what you always tell me about not apologizing for who I am. So I didn't. I told them exactly where I came from and why that made me stronger, not weaker." "That's my girl," Carmen said, her voice thick with tears and pride. "That's my strong, beautiful, brilliant girl." After they hung up, Jasmine found a quiet corner where she could decompress and prepare for her next round. The tournament format meant she would have 3 more debates today, each one more challenging than the last. But for the first time since arriving in Boston, she felt like she truly belonged here. That was incredible. She looked up to see Ryan approaching, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the concession stand. "I thought you might need some caffeine," he said, offering her one of the cups. That was one of the best opening statements I've ever heard in this hall. "Really?" Jasmine asked, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I felt like I was rambling." "Are you kidding? You had the entire room hanging on every word." Victoria Sterling has been competing in these tournaments for 4 years, and she's never been shut down like that. You didn't just beat her arguments, you made them irrelevant. They sat together on a bench in the hallway watching. Other competitors and their families moved between debate rooms. Jasmine noticed how different the atmosphere was from what she was used to back home. Here, parents hired professional videographers to record their children's performances. Coaches huddled with their students between rounds, analyzing every gesture and word choice. Some competitors had entire teams of supporters, like small armies dedicated to their success. "Does it ever feel overwhelming?" she asked Ryan. "All this intensity?" "Every day," he admitted. "Sometimes I think about how different my life would be if I hadn't gotten that scholarship. I'd probably be working construction with my dad, coming home tired and covered in dust, never knowing that places like this existed." "Do you ever feel guilty about it? About having opportunities that other people from your background will never get?" Ryan considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. But then I think about what my success might mean for the next kid from a trailer park in Ohio who dreams bigger than his circumstances. Maybe seeing someone like me here will make it seem possible for them too." Jasmine nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. She thought about all the kids back in Detroit who looked like her, who came from where she came from, who had been told in 1,000 small ways that places like Harvard weren't for people like them. My next opponent is someone named Jonathan Blackwell from Exeter, she said, checking her schedule. Know anything about him? Ryan's expression grew serious. Jonathan's good. Really good. He won the New England Championship last year, and he's been training for this tournament since he was in middle school. His father is a Supreme Court justice, and his mother teaches constitutional law at Yale. Great, Jasmine muttered. Another privileged legacy kid. But here's the thing, Ryan continued. He's used to winning because of his preparation and his connections. He's not used to facing someone who has something real to prove. You caught Victoria off guard because she underestimated you. Jonathan won't make that mistake, but that doesn't mean you can't beat him. They talked strategy for another 20 minutes, with Ryan helping her anticipate the kinds of arguments someone with Jonathan's background might make. Unlike Victoria, who had relied primarily on economic theory, Jonathan was known for his philosophical approach to debate topics. He would probably try to engage her on the level of pure intellectual theory, where his expensive education and years of private tutoring had given him significant advantages. Don't let him pull you into an academic pissing contest, Ryan advised. Stay true to what worked in your first round. Make it personal. Make it real. Force him to engage with the human cost of the policies you're debating. As the time for her second round approached, Jasmine felt her nerves returning. Beating Victoria had been incredible, but it had also raised expectations. People would be watching her now, some hoping to see her succeed, others waiting for her to fail and prove that her first victory had been a fluke. She made her way back into the debate hall, which had somehow become even more crowded. Word of her upset victory over Victoria Sterling had spread, and people wanted to see if the girl from Detroit could do it again. Jonathan Blackwell was already at his podium when she arrived, looking every inch the young aristocrat. He was tall and lean, with the kind of effortless polish that came from a lifetime of privilege. His suit was perfectly tailored, his dark hair was styled with expensive products, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never doubted his own superiority. But when their eyes met across the debate hall, Jasmine saw something she hadn't expected: respect. Unlike Victoria, who had looked at her with barely concealed contempt, Jonathan seemed genuinely interested in the challenge she might present. The topic for this round was, should democratic societies prioritize equality of opportunity or equality of outcome? Jonathan, arguing for equality of opportunity, would go first. As he began his opening statement, Jasmine realized that Ryan had been right. Jonathan was very, very good. His arguments were sophisticated and nuanced, drawing on philosophers from Aristotle to Rawls, weaving together complex ideas about justice, merit, and social responsibility. But as she listened to his polished delivery, Jasmine also heard something else: the assumptions of someone who had never questioned whether the playing field was actually level, who had never wondered whether equality of opportunity meant anything when some people started the race miles ahead of others. When her turn came, she was ready for him. My opponent speaks eloquently about equality of opportunity, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed hall. But I wonder if he's ever seen what opportunity actually looks like for most Americans. She paused, making eye contact with Jonathan before continuing. Opportunity for me looked like studying by candlelight when our electricity got shut off. It looked like my mother working double shifts so I could afford to buy used textbooks. It looked like walking past drug dealers on my way to school because education was my only way out. The room was completely silent now, hanging on her every word. My opponent talks about merit and fair competition, but what's fair about a race where some people start at the finish line while others start in quicksand? What's merit-based about a system where your zip code determines the quality of your education, where your parents' bank account determines whether you can afford to compete? She was hitting her stride now, her passion and conviction filling the space in a way that Jonathan's intellectual precision never could. Equality of opportunity is meaningless without equality of foundation. You can't have a fair race when some runners have professional coaches and others don't even have shoes. When she finished, the applause was immediate and sustained. Even some of the judges were nodding appreciatively. Jonathan's rebuttal was skillful, but it felt hollow against the raw truth of Jasmine's arguments. 30 minutes later, she had won her second round. This time the victory felt different. The first round had been about proving she belonged. This round had been about proving she could win. As she left the stage, she caught sight of several college recruiters in the audience, all taking notes and looking at her with new interest. The girl from Detroit was no longer just a curiosity. She was a contender. By the end of the first day, Jasmine had won all 4 of her preliminary rounds. Each victory had been harder than the last, but also more satisfying. Word was spreading through the tournament that the unknown girl from Detroit was dismantling some of the most privileged competitors in the country, and suddenly everyone wanted to know who she was. Between rounds, reporters from debate publications approached her for interviews. College recruiters handed her their business cards. Other competitors who had ignored her that morning were now trying to strike up conversations, suddenly interested in her techniques and preparation methods. But with the attention came pressure. The preliminary rounds had been about surviving and advancing. Tomorrow's elimination rounds would be about winning it all. That evening, Jasmine sat in her hotel room, exhausted but too wired to sleep. Her phone had been buzzing constantly with congratulatory texts from friends back home, but she felt more isolated than ever. The higher she climbed in the tournament, the more she realized how different her world was from that of her competitors. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Ryan standing in the hallway holding a bag of takeout food. "I figured you might be too nervous to eat, but you need to keep your strength up," he said. "Chinese food okay?" They sat on her hotel room floor, eating lo mein and fried rice while going over the next day's bracket. Jasmine had drawn a tough path to the finals, with 3 more rounds against increasingly skilled opponents. "Your quarterfinal is against Miles Patterson from Choate," Ryan said, consulting the tournament schedule. "He's technically excellent, probably the most prepared debater here, but he's also arrogant. He tends to talk down to his opponents, especially if he thinks they're not at his level." "Let me guess," Jasmine said dryly. "Another rich kid who's never had to work for anything." "Actually no. Miles is different. His family has money now, but his parents were immigrants who built their fortune from nothing. He's got this chip on his shoulder about proving he's smarter than everyone else. In some ways, he might be harder to beat than the legacy kids because he actually understands what it means to fight for something." Jasmine considered this. She had been using her opponent's privilege against them, turning their assumptions about her into weapons. But if Miles Patterson understood struggle, her usual tactics might not work. "What's his weak spot?" she asked. Ryan smiled. "He's so focused on proving he's the smartest person in the room that he sometimes forgets he's supposed to be persuading people, not just showing off his intelligence. If you can make him look arrogant or out of touch, you can win over the judges even if his arguments are technically superior." They spent the next 2 hours developing strategy, with Ryan helping her anticipate Miles's likely approaches and prepare counterarguments. But as the night wore on, their conversation drifted away from debate tactics and toward more personal topics. "Can I ask you something?" Jasmine said as they finished the last of the Chinese food. "Why are you helping me? I mean, you're judging some of these rounds. Isn't this kind of a conflict of interest?" Ryan was quiet for a moment, staring at the empty takeout containers. "I'm not judging any of your rounds from here on out. The tournament organizers made sure of that after they saw us talking earlier. That doesn't answer my question." He looked up at her, his expression serious. "Because I see myself in you. When I first got to Harvard, I felt like I was pretending to be someone I wasn't, trying to fit into a world that wasn't built for people like me. But you're not pretending. You're showing up as exactly who you are, and you're winning because of it, not despite it." "It doesn't feel like winning sometimes," Jasmine admitted. "It feels like I'm fighting for my life every time I get up there." "Maybe that's why you're so good at it. For most of these kids, debate is a game. For you it's survival. That gives your arguments a power they can't match." They talked until nearly midnight, and when Ryan finally left, Jasmine felt calmer than she had all day. Having someone who understood her struggle, who believed in her success, made the pressure feel more manageable. But the next morning brought new challenges. When she arrived at the tournament site, she discovered that her quarter-final match against Miles Patterson had been moved to the main auditorium, the largest venue on campus. What had started as a standard elimination round was now being treated as a featured event. The auditorium was packed. Every seat was filled and people were standing along the walls. Jasmine recognized faces from the debate community, college coaches, and even some local reporters. In the front row, she spotted several Harvard professors who had come to see what all the fuss was about. Miles Patterson was already on stage when she arrived, and Ryan's description had been accurate. He was a small, intense young man who carried himself like he was perpetually annoyed that other people couldn't keep up with his intellect. His opening statement was a masterclass in technical debate skills, full of complex arguments and sophisticated reasoning. But as Jasmine listened to him speak, she realized he was making exactly the mistake Ryan had predicted. He was talking to the judges like they were graduate students in a philosophy seminar, not like human beings who needed to be persuaded of his position. When her turn came, she took a different approach entirely. My opponent has given us a very impressive display of academic knowledge, she began, her tone respectful but with just a hint of challenge. But I have to wonder if all those big words and complex theories actually mean anything to the people who are affected by the policies we're debating. She paused, letting her words sink in, then continued with growing confidence. See, the thing about real life is that it's messy. It doesn't fit neatly into philosophical frameworks or economic models. Real life is a single mother trying to decide between paying for her child's asthma medication or keeping the lights on. Real life is a brilliant student who can't afford college application fees, so his potential goes to waste. Real life is my neighbor Mr. Williams, who worked in a factory for 30 years until it moved overseas, and now he stocks shelves at a grocery store for a third of what he used to make. The audience was completely engaged now, leaning forward in their seats. Even Miles looked slightly off balance, not used to having his arguments challenged on emotional grounds. My opponent wants to discuss theory, Jasmine continued, her voice rising with passion. I want to discuss reality. Because at the end of the day, policies aren't about impressing professors or winning academic debates. They're about making life better for actual human beings. Her rebuttal was devastating. She took each of Miles's carefully constructed arguments and showed how they would play out in the real world, particularly for people who didn't have the luxury of theoretical discussions about social policy. By the time she finished, Miles looked frustrated and defensive. In his final statement, he made the mistake of becoming condescending, talking about how emotional appeals were inferior to rational analysis. The moment those words left his mouth, Jasmine knew she had won. The judges were clearly put off by his arrogance, and the audience had turned against him. When the decision was announced, the applause was thunderous. Jasmine had not only won her quarterfinal but had done so in a way that felt like a statement about the entire tournament. She wasn't just competing against individual opponents, she was challenging the assumption that intellectual superiority belonged to the wealthy and privileged. But her celebration was short-lived. As she left the stage, she overheard a conversation between two tournament officials that made her blood run cold. "This is getting out of hand," one of them was saying. "The whole narrative is shifting. Instead of celebrating academic excellence, people are acting like this is some kind of class warfare." "Maybe it is," the other replied. "Maybe that's exactly what she's turning it into. Well, we need to be careful. The donors who fund this tournament aren't going to be happy if their children keep getting embarrassed by sob stories and emotional manipulation." Jasmine felt a chill run down her spine. She had been so focused on winning individual debates that she hadn't considered the bigger picture. She wasn't just competing against other students. She was challenging an entire system that was invested in maintaining the status quo. As she made her way out of the auditorium, she spotted Ryan waiting for her near the exit. His expression was proud but also worried. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "There are some things you need to know before your semi-final tomorrow." Jasmine nodded, suddenly understanding that the real battle was just beginning. She had proven she could beat the best debaters in the country. Now she had to prove she could survive the system that was determined to stop her. Ryan led Jasmine to a quiet coffee shop off campus, away from the tournament crowds and prying eyes. The place was nearly empty, filled with the kind of comfortable silence that comes with old furniture and the smell of roasted beans. They found a corner booth where they could talk without being overheard. "Before you say anything," Jasmine began, "I heard those tournament officials talking. I know they're not happy about me winning." Ryan nodded grimly. "It's worse than you think. There's talk about changing the judging criteria for tomorrow's rounds, making them more focused on technical excellence, and less on emotional persuasion. They're basically trying to create rules that will favor your opponent's style of debate over yours." Jasmine felt her stomach drop. Can they do that? In the middle of a tournament? Technically, yes. The tournament rules allow for adjustments if the organizing committee thinks it's necessary to maintain academic standards. But it's never been done before, at least not this obviously. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what this meant settling between them. Jasmine had been winning because she brought humanity to abstract debates, because she could make judges and audiences care about the real-world implications of policy arguments. If the rules were changed to eliminate that advantage, she would be fighting with one hand tied behind her back. "There's something else," Ryan continued, his voice even more serious. "I wasn't supposed to tell you this, but I think you have a right to know. Your semi-final opponent tomorrow is Victoria Sterling." "Victoria? But I beat her in the first round." "She lost her next match but got back in through the wild card bracket. And Jasmine, she's been preparing specifically to face you again." Her mother hired a professional debate coach yesterday, someone who specializes in countering unconventional debating styles. Jasmine laughed bitterly. Unconventional. Is that what they're calling it when someone talks about real life instead of abstract theory? It gets worse. Victoria's mother has been working the crowd, talking to judges and tournament officials, suggesting that your style of debate is somehow unprofessional or inappropriate for academic competition. She's building a narrative that you're succeeding through manipulation rather than skill. The unfairness of it hit Jasmine like a physical blow. She had been winning through preparation, intelligence, and the power of her arguments. But because those arguments came from lived experience rather than expensive textbooks, they were being dismissed as emotional manipulation. "So what do I do?" she asked, hating how defeated she sounded. Ryan reached across the table and took her hand. The gesture was gentle but firm, grounding her in the moment. "You do what you've been doing. You show up as yourself and you tell your truth. Because here's what they don't understand. You're not winning because you're manipulating people's emotions. You're winning because your arguments are better. They're more honest, more complete, more connected to reality. But if they change the rules, then we adapt. I've been thinking about this all afternoon and I have some ideas. Your semi-final topic is going to be about educational reform. Instead of leading with your personal story, you could start with the academic research that supports your position, then use your experience to illustrate those points." For the next 2 hours, they worked on a new strategy that would satisfy the judges' apparent preference for academic rigor while still allowing Jasmine to bring her unique perspective to the debate. Ryan had brought printed articles from education journals, statistical analyses, and policy papers that supported the arguments Jasmine had been making from personal experience. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a research study. "Everything you've been saying about how economic inequality affects educational outcomes is backed up by extensive academic research. You don't need to choose between being intellectual and being real. You can be both." As they worked, Jasmine found herself studying Ryan's face, noticing details she hadn't paid attention to before. The way his eyes lit up when he explained a particularly elegant argument. The focused intensity he brought to problem solving. The genuine care he showed for her success, even though helping her could potentially damage his own standing in the debate community. "Why are you doing this?" she asked during a lull in their preparation. "I mean, really? You could get in trouble for helping me. It could hurt your reputation here." Ryan looked up from the papers spread across their table, his expression serious. "Do you remember what you said in your first round? About how economic inequality wasn't abstract for you, it was personal." Jasmine nodded. "Well, watching you compete, seeing how you've turned your struggles into strength, it's made me realize something about myself. I've been so focused on fitting in here, on proving I belong, that I've been hiding parts of who I am. You've shown me that maybe our backgrounds aren't something to overcome. Maybe they're our greatest assets." There was something in his voice that made Jasmine look at him more closely. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've been pretending to be someone I'm not for so long that I almost forgot who I actually am. But watching you stay true to yourself, even when it's hard, even when people try to tear you down for it, it's reminded me why I wanted to be here in the first place." They were sitting close together now, their voices low and intimate in the empty coffee shop. Jasmine could smell his cologne, something subtle and clean, and she noticed the way his shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong forearms. "Ryan," she said softly, "are you telling me that my debate performances inspired you to have some kind of personal revelation?" He laughed and the sound was warm and genuine. "Something like that. Although it's not just your debate performances. It's everything about you. Your courage, your intelligence, the way you refuse to apologize for who you are." The moment hung between them, charged with possibility. Jasmine felt her heart rate increase, but not from tournament nerves this time. This was something entirely different, something that had been building between them since their first conversation outside the debate hall. "I should probably tell you something," Ryan said, his voice even quieter now. "I've been to every one of your rounds. Not just the ones I was judging. I've been watching from the audience, cheering you on even when I was supposed to be maintaining professional neutrality." "Really? Really? And every time you won, every time you proved those people wrong about who belongs in places like this, I felt proud in a way that probably crossed some professional boundaries." Jasmine felt warmth spreading through her chest. In the middle of all the stress and pressure of the tournament, she had found something unexpected. A connection with someone who understood her struggle, who celebrated her victories, who saw her as more than just an interesting anomaly. "I should probably tell you something too," she said, matching his quiet tone. "Having you believe in me has meant more than any debate victory. Knowing that someone like you thinks I belong here has made me believe it myself. Someone like me? Someone brilliant and kind and genuine. Someone who could choose to support the safe candidates but instead chose to support the girl who makes everyone uncomfortable. They were very close now, close enough that Jasmine could see the flecks of gold in Ryan's brown eyes. The coffee shop around them had faded into background noise, and all that mattered was this moment, this connection, this feeling of being truly seen and understood. Jasmine, Ryan said, his voice barely above a whisper, I know this probably isn't the best timing with the tournament and everything, but I need you to know that what I feel for you goes way beyond admiration for your debating skills. Before she could respond, he leaned forward and kissed her softly. It was gentle and tentative at first, as if he was asking permission, but when she kissed him back, it deepened into something more sure and passionate. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Wow, Jasmine whispered. Yeah, Ryan agreed, his forehead resting against hers. Wow. They sat like that for a moment, foreheads touching, sharing the same breath, both of them smiling despite the seriousness of everything they were facing. This complicates things, Jasmine said finally. Everything was already complicated, Ryan replied. At least now it's complicated in a good way too. They spent another hour in the coffee shop, but the dynamic between them had shifted. The planning session had become something more intimate, their conversation interwoven with stolen glances and brief touches. When Ryan explained a debate strategy, his hand would linger on hers. When Jasmine leaned over to read a document, she would let her shoulder brush against his. By the time they left the coffee shop, they had both a solid plan for the next day's semifinal and something deeper. A partnership that went beyond debate coaching, a connection that made both of them feel less alone in their struggles. Walking back toward campus in the soft evening light, Ryan took her hand. It felt natural and right, like they had been doing it for years instead of hours. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said as they reached the entrance to her hotel, I want you to know that you've already won something more important than any tournament. What's that? You've proven that authenticity is more powerful than privilege. You've shown that courage matters more than connections. And you've made at least one person believe that maybe the world can change one truth at a time. Jasmine squeezed his hand, feeling stronger and more confident than she had since arriving in Boston. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new attempts to silence her voice or diminish her success. But she wouldn't be facing them alone. She had found an ally, a supporter, and something she hadn't been looking for but desperately needed. Someone who loved her not despite where she came from but because of it. The next morning brought news that confirmed Jasmine's worst fears. Posted outside the debate hall was a notice about revised judging criteria that emphasized academic rigor, scholarly presentation, and adherence to traditional debate formats. Reading between the lines, it was clear that the tournament organizers were trying to neutralize her emotional appeal and force her to compete on terms that favored her more traditionally trained opponents. But that wasn't the worst part. As Jasmine made her way to the competitor check-in area, she overheard a conversation that made her blood boil. I heard they're calling her this sob story girl, one student was saying to his friend. Like she only wins because she makes people feel sorry for her. My dad says it's embarrassing for the tournament, his companion replied. Having someone win based on emotional manipulation instead of actual skill. Jasmine wanted to confront them, to defend herself against accusations that were as unfair as they were untrue. But she forced herself to keep walking, knowing that any response would just feed into the narrative that she was too emotional, too volatile, too different from what a serious debater should be. The worst moment came when she was reviewing her notes in a quiet corner of the building. Victoria Sterling approached with two other competitors, their expressions suggesting this wasn't a friendly visit. Well, if it isn't Detroit's finest, Victoria said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Ready for round two? I'm always ready, Jasmine replied evenly, not looking up from her notes. I hope you are, because things are going to be different this time. No more winning because you make people cry with your little stories about growing up poor. Now Jasmine did look up, meeting Victoria's gaze directly. Is that what you think? That I won because of stories? What else could it be? It's certainly not your debate skills. I mean, you didn't even know who John Rawls was until you looked him up after our first round. The comment hit harder than it should have because there was a grain of truth to it. Jasmine had indeed looked up several philosophers and theorists that Victoria had mentioned, filling gaps in her formal education that her more privileged opponents took for granted. The thing is, Victoria continued, emboldened by Jasmine's silence, this tournament is supposed to be about academic excellence, not about who has the most tragic backstory. Some of us have actually studied for this, actually earned our place here through years of hard work. And some of us, one of Victoria's friends added, didn't need to turn our personal problems into debate strategies. Jasmine felt something crack inside her chest. All the pressure, all the scrutiny, all the whispered comments and barely concealed resentment came crashing down on her at once. She had been so focused on proving she belonged that she hadn't fully processed how much energy it took to constantly defend her right to exist in this space. "You know what?" she said, standing up and gathering her materials. "You're right. I don't belong here." Victoria looked surprised, as if she hadn't expected her attack to be quite so effective. "I don't belong in a place where talking about real life is considered cheating," Jasmine continued, her voice growing louder. "I don't belong in a place where having actual experience with the topics we debate is seen as an unfair advantage. I don't belong in a place where people think struggling makes you weak instead of strong." Other students were starting to stare now, drawn by the raised voices and obvious tension. "So congratulations, Victoria. You figured out exactly what everyone else here already knew. The poor girl from Detroit doesn't belong at Harvard." With that, Jasmine walked away, leaving behind a wake of shocked silence. She made it all the way to the bathroom before the tears started, locking herself in a stall and trying to muffle the sobs that came from somewhere deep in her chest. All the doubt and insecurity she had been pushing down for days came flooding out. Maybe Victoria was right. Maybe she was just a charity case, a token participant brought in to make the tournament look diverse. Maybe her victories had been flukes, judges taking pity on the girl with the sad story instead of recognizing genuine talent. She thought about her mother working double shifts to pay for this trip, about Mr. Rodriguez spending his own money on research materials to help her prepare, about all the people back home who were counting on her to prove that someone like them could succeed in places like this. The weight of their expectations felt crushing. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. "Where are you? I've been looking for you." She didn't respond. How could she explain that she was falling apart just hours before the most important debate of her life? How could she admit that all the confidence and determination she had shown him was just a facade covering up a scared, insecure girl who was in way over her head? 20 minutes later, there was a soft knock on the bathroom door. "Jasmine? It's me." She wiped her eyes and tried to make her voice sound normal. "I'm fine. Just getting ready for the semi-final." "No, you're not fine. And that's okay. Can you let me in? Please?" Against her better judgment, she unlocked the bathroom door. Ryan slipped inside, immediately wrapping her in a hug that made the tears start again. "I heard what happened with Victoria," he said softly, stroking her hair. "Someone recorded part of it on their phone. The whole tournament is talking about it." "Great," Jasmine mumbled into his shoulder. "So now everyone knows I'm a fraud who can't handle criticism. Is that really what you think you are?" She pulled back to look at him, her eyes red and swollen. "I don't know anymore. Maybe Victoria's right. Maybe I only got this far because people feel sorry for me." Ryan's expression grew serious, almost angry. "Listen to me very carefully because I'm only going to say this once. You are the most talented debater I have ever seen. Your arguments are better than anyone else's because they're rooted in truth instead of theory. Your delivery is more powerful because it comes from conviction instead of training. You haven't won because people pity you. You've won because you're better than them. But I don't know all the things they know. I haven't read all the books, studied all the philosophers. So what? You've lived experiences they've only read about. You understand problems they can only theorize about. That doesn't make you less qualified. It makes you more qualified." He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Victoria Sterling has been handed everything she's ever wanted. She's never had to fight for anything, never had to prove she deserves to exist. She attacks you because she's terrified of what you represent. The possibility that merit matters more than money, that authenticity matters more than pedigree." Jasmine felt some of her strength returning. But what if the new judging criteria? Then we beat them at their own game. We show them that you can be both academically rigorous and emotionally honest. We prove that someone can cite Aristotle and still talk about real life. They spent the next hour in that bathroom with Ryan helping Jasmine rebuild her confidence piece by piece. He reminded her of every argument she had won, every moment she had silenced a room with the power of her words, every time she had turned her supposed disadvantages into strengths. "You know what I think?" Ryan said as they finally prepared to leave. "I think Victoria did you a favor. She showed you exactly what you're fighting against and she reminded you why you're fighting." "What do you mean?" "You're not just competing in a debate tournament anymore. You're proving that the American dream still exists, that talent and hard work can still overcome privilege and connections. Every time you win, you're opening a door for someone else like you. When they emerged from the bathroom, the hallway was buzzing with pre-competition energy. Jasmine could feel people staring at her, some with sympathy, others with curiosity, a few with barely concealed hostility. But for the first time all day she didn't care. She had remembered who she was and why she was here. An hour later she was back on the stage facing Victoria Sterling for the second time. The main auditorium was packed beyond capacity, with people standing along the walls and sitting in the aisles. Word had spread about their earlier confrontation, and everyone wanted to see how this rematch would play out. Victoria looked confident and polished as always, but Jasmine thought she detected something new in her opponent's expression: nervousness. Maybe Victoria had realized that her psychological warfare might have backfired, that trying to break Jasmine's spirit might have only made her stronger. The topic for the semi-final was, should standardized testing be eliminated from college admissions? Victoria, arguing in favor of keeping standardized tests, went first. Her opening statement was technically flawless, full of research citations and statistical analysis. She argued that standardized tests provided an objective measure of academic ability, that they ensured fairness by creating a common standard for all applicants. But as Jasmine listened, she realized that Victoria was making the same mistake she had made in their first encounter. She was treating this like a purely academic exercise, ignoring the human reality of how standardized testing actually affected students' lives. When her turn came, Jasmine was ready. "My opponent speaks about objectivity and fairness," she began, her voice clear and strong. "But I want to talk about what standardized testing actually looks like for students who don't have her advantages." She paused, making eye contact with the judges before continuing. "Fairness is not making everyone take the same test. Fairness is acknowledging that some students take that test after a full breakfast and a good night's sleep in a quiet house, while others take it hungry because there wasn't enough food at home, tired because they worked a job the night before to help their family pay rent." The audience was completely focused on her now, and Jasmine could see that even the judges who had seemed skeptical were leaning forward to hear what she would say next. "My opponent talks about common standards, but what's standard about a test that costs money some families don't have? What's standard about a test that favors students who can afford prep courses and tutors? What's standard about a test that measures how well you've been taught, not how capable you are of learning?" She was building momentum now, her passion and conviction filling the space in a way that Victoria's technical precision never could. Standardized tests don't measure intelligence. They measure privilege. They don't identify the best students. They identify the most advantaged students. And when we use them as the primary criterion for college admissions, we're not ensuring fairness. We're ensuring that the same families that have always had access to higher education continue to have that access, while everyone else gets shut out. Jasmine then did something that surprised everyone in the room. Instead of continuing with emotional appeals, she shifted into academic mode, citing recent research studies about test bias, statistical analyses of correlation between family income and test scores, and expert opinions from educational psychologists. Dr. Sarah Chen's longitudinal study at Stanford found that standardized test scores correlate more strongly with family income than with actual academic performance in college, she said, her voice taking on the authoritative tone she had learned from her more privileged competitors. The Educational Testing Service's own research shows that students from families earning over $100,000 per year score an average of 400 points higher than students from families earning under $20,000. She was beating them at their own game now, using their preferred style of academic argumentation while never losing sight of the human cost of the policies they were debating. Victoria's rebuttal was desperate, focusing on technical details and trying to poke holes in Jasmine's statistics. But it was clear that she was rattled, unprepared for an opponent who could be both academically rigorous and emotionally compelling. In her final statement, Jasmine brought together everything she had learned about debate strategy with everything she knew about real life. "The question before us today is not whether standardized tests are perfectly accurate measures of academic ability," she concluded. "The question is whether we want our education system to reflect our values. Do we value fairness or do we value tradition? Do we want to identify talent wherever it exists, or do we want to keep confirming the advantages of those who already have them?" She paused, looking directly at Victoria. "My opponent and I represent two different visions of what American education should be. She represents the vision that says the system is working fine because it's working for people like her. I represent the vision that says the system should work for everyone, that excellence and potential exist in every community, every neighborhood, every family regardless of their bank account. When she finished, the applause was deafening. Even some of the judges were applauding, something Jasmine had never seen in a formal debate setting. Victoria's final rebuttal was weak and defensive, and when the judges announced their decision 30 minutes later, Jasmine felt like she was floating. Advancing to tomorrow's championship round, representing Detroit Public Schools, Jasmine Johnson. As she left the stage, she caught sight of Victoria's mother in the front row. Mrs. Sterling's face was a mask of barely controlled fury, and Jasmine realized that her victory had implications far beyond the tournament. She had just proven that privilege could be beaten, that the established order could be challenged, that someone like her could not only compete but win in the most elite spaces. But as she basked in the glow of victory, surrounded by well-wishers and reporters, she also noticed the tournament officials huddled in intense conversation near the exit. Their expressions were serious, almost grim, and she had the distinct feeling that her success was creating problems she hadn't anticipated. The championship round was less than 24 hours away, and Jasmine was beginning to understand that her biggest challenge might not be her opponent, but the system itself. The aftermath of Jasmine's victory over Victoria Sterling sent ripples throughout the tournament community that extended far beyond the debate hall. Within hours, video clips of her performance were circulating on social media, shared by viewers who had never followed competitive debate but were captivated by her authentic passion and compelling arguments. That evening, Jasmine's hotel room phone rang constantly with interview requests from national media outlets. CNN wanted her for their morning show. The Washington Post was planning a feature story. Even late-night talk show producers were reaching out, recognizing that her story had captured something larger than just a high school debate tournament. But with the attention came pressure from unexpected directions. "Miss Johnson?" The voice on the phone was crisp and professional. "This is Margaret Williams from the Harvard Alumni Association. I was wondering if you might have a few minutes to discuss your performance today." Jasmine accepted the call, thinking it might be an opportunity to connect with potential mentors or supporters. Instead, the conversation took a disturbing turn. "Your success has been quite remarkable," Ms. Williams began, "but there are some concerns about the tone and direction of the tournament. Some of our major donors feel that the competition has become less about academic excellence and more about other factors." "I'm not sure I understand," Jasmine replied, though she was beginning to get a clear picture of exactly what was happening. "Well, there's a feeling that perhaps the judging criteria have been inconsistent, that emotional appeals are being weighted too heavily compared to scholarly argumentation. We want to ensure that tomorrow's championship round reflects the highest standards of academic debate." The message was clear: tone it down or face consequences that could extend far beyond the tournament. After hanging up, Jasmine sat on her hotel bed feeling more isolated than ever. The success that should have been a triumph was turning into a burden. Every victory seemed to generate new opposition, new attempts to silence her voice or delegitimize her achievements. A knock at her door interrupted her brooding. She opened it to find Ryan standing in the hallway with a serious expression. "We need to talk," he said. "And we should probably go somewhere private." They walked to a small park near the hotel, finding a bench under a streetlight where they could speak without being overheard. Ryan's usual warmth was replaced by obvious concern. "I've been hearing things," he began. "Conversations between tournament officials, discussions among the judges. There's a coordinated effort to make sure you don't win tomorrow." Jasmine felt her stomach drop. "What kind of effort?" "They're planning to stack the judging panel with people who are known to favor traditional academic debate styles over emotional appeals. They're also considering implementing a new scoring system that heavily weights technical argumentation and penalizes what they're calling non-academic content." "Can they do that? Change the rules right before the final round?" "Technically, yes. The tournament bylaws give the organizing committee broad discretion to ensure academic integrity. But Jasmine, what they're doing isn't about academic integrity. It's about protecting a system that benefits people like Victoria Sterling and her family." They sat in silence for a moment, watching cars pass on the street. Jasmine felt the weight of everything she was up against. Not just her opponent in tomorrow's final, but an entire establishment that was threatened by what her success represented. "There's something else," Ryan continued, his voice even more serious. "I heard Mrs. Sterling talking to some board members. She's threatening to pull her family's donations to Harvard if you win. And she's not the only one. Several major donors are apparently coordinating to pressure the university." "Over a high school debate tournament?" "It's not about the tournament anymore. It's about what you represent. You've shown that someone without privilege and connections can beat their children in their own arena. that threatens everything they believe about merit and superiority. Jasmine stood up and began pacing, her mind racing. So what do I do? Give up? Lose on purpose? Pretend that everything they're saying about me is true? No, Ryan said firmly, standing to face her. You do exactly what you've been doing. You show up tomorrow as yourself and you tell your truth. Because here's what they don't understand. You're not just fighting for yourself anymore. You're fighting for every kid who's been told they don't belong, every student who's been dismissed because of their background, every person who's been told that their lived experience doesn't matter. He took her hands in his eyes intense and sincere. You think they're trying to stop you because you're not good enough? They're trying to stop you because you're too good. Because you've proven that their whole system is based on maintaining advantages rather than recognizing talent. But if they change the rules, then we beat them anyway. We show them that authenticity and truth are more powerful than any rigged system they can create. Over the next few hours, they developed a strategy for the championship round that would satisfy the most rigid academic standards while still allowing Jasmine to bring her unique perspective to the debate. Ryan had spent the evening researching her likely opponent, a student named Christopher Hamilton from Phillips Exeter Academy. Christopher is different from Victoria or any of your other opponents, Ryan explained as they reviewed materials in the hotel lobby. He's genuinely brilliant, not just well prepared. His father is a federal judge, his mother is a constitutional law professor, and he's been groomed for this kind of competition his entire life. What's his weakness? He doesn't have one, at least not in the traditional sense. But his strength might also be his weakness. He's so used to winning that he's never had to adapt or overcome real adversity. He's never faced an opponent like you. They worked until nearly 3 a.m., preparing arguments and anticipating counterarguments, building a case that would be unassailable on both academic and emotional grounds. When they finally said goodnight, Ryan kissed her gently and whispered, "Whatever happens tomorrow, you've already changed everything. Win or lose, you've proven that the world can be different." But sleep didn't come easily for Jasmine. She lay in bed thinking about all the people who were counting on her, all the expectations she was carrying, all the forces that were aligned against her success. The girl who had arrived in Boston a week ago with nothing but determination and a second-hand blazer was now at the center of a battle that extended far beyond any debate tournament. The next morning brought ominous news. Posted outside the debate hall was a notice about enhanced academic standards for the championship round, including a new scoring system that heavily emphasized scholarly rigor and technical precision. The message was clear. Jasmine's emotional style of argumentation would not be tolerated in the final round. But as she read the notice, surrounded by other competitors and their families, Jasmine felt something unexpected: relief. The pretense was finally over. The system was showing its true colors, revealing that it had never been about fair competition or academic excellence. It had always been about maintaining power and protecting privilege. "Nervous?" asked a familiar voice behind her. She turned to see Christopher Hamilton, her opponent for the championship round. He was exactly what she had expected. Tall, confident, perfectly groomed, with the kind of effortless polish that came from a lifetime of advantage. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw something unexpected: respect. "Honestly? Yes," Jasmine replied. "But probably not for the reasons you think." Christopher smiled, and it was genuine rather than condescending. "I've watched all your rounds. You're the most impressive debater I've ever seen. I'm honored to compete against you, even if I plan to beat you." There was something refreshingly honest about his approach, so different from Victoria's psychological warfare or Miles Patterson's arrogance. Christopher Hamilton might be privileged, but he was also a genuine competitor who respected the game and his opponents. "May the best debater win," Jasmine said, extending her hand. "Agreed," Christopher replied, shaking it firmly. "Though I think we might have different definitions of what makes someone the best." As they parted ways to prepare for the championship round, Jasmine realized that she was about to face her toughest opponent yet. Someone who combined genuine talent with institutional advantages, someone who could match her passion with superior preparation, someone who represented everything the system was designed to produce. But she was ready for him. More than that, she was ready for everything the championship round would bring: the rigged judging criteria, the hostile audience members, the pressure from forces far beyond the debate hall. She had found her voice in this tournament, and no one was going to silence it now. The final battle was about to begin. The championship round was held in Harvard's largest auditorium, a grand space that had hosted Nobel Prize winners, Supreme Court justices, and presidents. Every seat was filled, with an overflow crowd watching on screens in adjacent buildings. What had started as a high school debate tournament had become something much larger. A symbolic battle over who belonged in America's elite institutions. Jasmine stood backstage, adjusting her blazer one final time. The same second-hand jacket that had drawn mockery a week ago now felt like armor, a reminder of how far she had come and what she was fighting for. Through the curtain, she could hear the buzz of anticipation from the packed auditorium. Ryan found her in the wings, his presence immediately calming her nerves. "How are you feeling?" he asked, straightening her collar with gentle hands. "Like I'm about to step into the most important moment of my life," she replied honestly. "You are. But remember, you've already won the thing that matters most. You've proven that someone like you can compete at this level. Everything else is just details." They were interrupted by a tournament official calling for competitors to take their places. As Jasmine walked toward the stage, Ryan caught her hand. "I love you," he said quietly, the words simple but weighted with everything they had shared over the past week. "I love you too," she replied, squeezing his hand before releasing it. The auditorium fell silent as she walked onto the stage. Christopher Hamilton was already at his podium, looking calm and confident. The judging panel had been expanded to 7 people, all wearing expressions of serious academic authority. Jasmine recognized 2 of them as Harvard law professors who had publicly criticized emotional manipulation in competitive debate. The head judge, Dean Patricia Morrison of Harvard Law School, stood to address the audience. Today's championship round will address the topic: should affirmative action policies be eliminated from college admissions? Mr. Hamilton will argue in favor of elimination, while Ms. Johnson will argue for preservation of these policies. Jasmine felt a chill run down her spine. Of all the possible topics, this was the most loaded, the most personal, the most designed to put her in an impossible position. If she argued passionately for affirmative action, she would be dismissed as self-interested. If she argued dispassionately, she would be failing to represent the experiences of people like herself. But as she looked out at the audience, she saw familiar faces in the crowd. Mr. Rodriguez had somehow made the trip from Detroit, sitting in the back row with tears already in his eyes. Mrs. Murphy was there too, having closed her store to witness this moment. And scattered throughout the auditorium were other faces like hers. Students of color, first-generation college applicants, kids from working-class families who had come to see someone like them compete at the highest level. Christopher began his opening statement with characteristic precision and eloquence. "Honorable judges, affirmative action policies, however well-intentioned, fundamentally violate the principle of equal treatment under law. They ask us to judge individuals not by their merits, but by their membership in racial categories. They create a system where academic achievement is secondary to demographic characteristics." His argument was sophisticated and well-researched, drawing on legal precedents and constitutional theory. He spoke about colorblind meritocracy, about the importance of individual achievement, about the dangers of perpetuating racial thinking in admissions processes. True equality, he concluded, means treating all applicants by the same standards, judging them by their achievements and potential rather than their ancestry or background. The applause was respectful but restrained. Christopher had delivered exactly the kind of argument the judges favored: academically rigorous, legally sophisticated, emotionally detached. Then it was Jasmine's turn. She stood slowly, taking a moment to look out at the packed auditorium. In the front rows, she could see the faces of privilege: tournament donors, Harvard board members, parents of elite prep school students. Their expressions ranged from skeptical to openly hostile. But in the back and along the sides she saw different faces. The faces of people who looked like her, who came from where she came from, who were watching to see if someone like them could win in a place like this. "Honorable judges," she began, her voice clear and strong, "my opponent speaks eloquently about colorblind meritocracy. But I want to talk about what merit actually looks like when you don't start at the finish line." She paused, letting her words settle, then continued with growing confidence. "Merit is not just about test scores and grades. Merit is about overcoming obstacles. Merit is about achieving excellence despite disadvantages, not because of advantages. Merit is about potential realized in the face of adversity." The auditorium was completely silent now, every person hanging on her words. "My opponent talks about equal treatment, but equal treatment is meaningless without equal opportunity. You cannot have a fair race when some runners start miles ahead of others. You cannot talk about merit when some students have private tutors while others work jobs to help their families survive." She then did something that surprised everyone in the room, including herself. Instead of continuing with personal anecdotes, she shifted into the kind of academic argumentation that the judges demanded. Justice Harry Blackmun wrote in his Bakke opinion that, in order to get beyond racism, we must first take account of race. Legal scholar Cheryl Harris argues that colorblind policies actually perpetuate white privilege by ignoring the historical and ongoing effects of systemic discrimination. She was citing legal precedents and academic authorities with the same sophistication as Christopher, but grounding every argument in lived reality. The University of California system eliminated affirmative action in 1996, she continued, her voice building momentum. African American enrollment at UC Berkeley dropped by 66% in the following year. Latino enrollment dropped by 53%. These were not students who lacked merit. These were students who lacked the structural advantages that make merit visible to traditional admissions processes. But then she did something that no one in the auditorium expected. She turned to face Christopher directly. My opponent and I represent two different definitions of merit. He represents the definition that says merit is having the highest test scores and the most impressive resume. I represent the definition that says merit is maximizing your potential regardless of your starting point. The room was electric now, sensing that something unprecedented was happening. Christopher Hamilton is undoubtedly brilliant. He's had every advantage: the best schools, the most experienced teachers, professional coaching, unlimited resources. And he's used those advantages well. That's admirable. She paused, her voice becoming more personal. But I want you to consider this. What if Christopher had grown up in my neighborhood? What if he had attended my schools, lived in my circumstances, faced my challenges? Would his brilliance still be visible? Would his potential still be recognized? Christopher's confident expression had shifted to something more uncertain, as if he was seeing himself and his achievements through a different lens for the first time. And what about me? Jasmine continued, her voice rising with passion. What if I had grown up with Christopher's advantages? What if I had attended his schools, had his resources, received his level of support? Where would I be now? What could I have achieved? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Affirmative action isn't about lowering standards. It's about recognizing that excellence takes many forms, that potential exists everywhere, that merit should be measured by how far you've traveled, not just where you've arrived. She turned back to the judges, her voice strong and clear. The question before you today is not whether Christopher Hamilton deserves his success. He does. The question is whether students like me deserve the chance to show what we can achieve when given the same opportunities. Her concluding statement was both academically sophisticated and deeply personal, weaving together constitutional law and lived experience in a way that made both more powerful. Justice Thurgood Marshall wrote that, "The Constitution is color-conscious to prevent discrimination being perpetuated and to undo the effects of past discrimination. I stand before you as living proof that when barriers are removed, when opportunities are extended, when potential is recognized regardless of privilege, amazing things can happen." She gestured toward the packed auditorium. Look around this room. Look at the faces watching this debate. Some of them see me as an intruder in their exclusive space. But others see me as proof that their dreams are possible, that their children's potential can be recognized, that excellence and opportunity are not the exclusive property of the privileged. Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried throughout the silent auditorium. Affirmative action is not about giving anyone something they don't deserve. It's about making sure that talent and potential are recognized wherever they exist. It's about ensuring that the American dream remains available to all Americans, not just those born with silver spoons. When she finished, the silence lasted for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Then, slowly, applause began to build. Not polite, restrained applause, but real appreciation for what they had just witnessed. Christopher's rebuttal was skillful but seemed hollow after Jasmine's passionate defense. He tried to return the discussion to abstract legal principles, but his arguments felt disconnected from the human reality that Jasmine had made impossible to ignore. In his final statement, Christopher surprised everyone by acknowledging her points. My opponent has challenged me to consider questions I've never had to think about, he said honestly. She's right that we have had different paths to this stage. She's right that advantages matter. But I still believe that any admissions system based on racial categories creates more problems than it solves. It was a gracious response, but it lacked the power and conviction of Jasmine's presentation. As the judges retired to deliberate, Jasmine felt a strange sense of peace. She had said everything she needed to say, fought as hard as she could fight, represented not just herself but everyone who had never been given a chance to speak in spaces like this. Whatever the judges decided, she had already won something more valuable than any tournament. She had proven that authenticity and truth could compete with privilege and preparation. She had shown that excellence could emerge from anywhere, that the American dream was still alive for those brave enough to pursue it. The waiting began. The deliberation lasted 45 minutes, though it felt like hours to Jasmine. She sat in a small room backstage trying to process everything that had happened over the past week. 7 days ago, she had been just another scholarship student from Detroit with big dreams and limited resources. Now she was at the center of a national conversation about merit, opportunity, and who belonged in America's elite institutions. Ryan found her during the wait, slipping into the room despite the tournament officials' attempts to keep competitors isolated during deliberation. "How are you holding up?" he asked, sitting beside her on the small couch. "Honestly, I feel like I already won," Jasmine replied, surprising herself with the truth of that statement. "Whatever the judges decide, I proved something important today. I proved it to myself and I proved it to everyone watching." "What did you prove?" "That excellence can come from anywhere. That someone like me can not only compete at this level but can change the conversation entirely. That authenticity is more powerful than privilege." They sat together in comfortable silence, holding hands and watching the clock tick toward the moment when the judges would announce their decision. Through the thin walls, they could hear the buzz of conversation from the packed auditorium, where hundreds of people waited to learn the outcome of what had become much more than a debate tournament. A knock at the door interrupted their quiet moment. A tournament official entered, looking nervous and uncomfortable. "Miss Johnson? The judges are ready to announce their decision. We need you back on stage." As Jasmine walked toward the stage, she felt a strange sense of calm. The pressure and anxiety that had plagued her throughout the tournament had been replaced by a quiet confidence. She had done everything she could do, said everything she needed to say. The rest was out of her hands. The auditorium fell silent as she and Christopher took their places at their podiums. Dean Morrison stood at center stage, holding an envelope that contained the judges' decision. "This has been an extraordinary tournament," the dean began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed space. "We have witnessed debate of the highest caliber, arguments that challenged our assumptions and made us think more deeply about complex issues." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "The judges want to acknowledge that both competitors demonstrated exceptional skill, preparation, and passion. This was not an easy decision." Jasmine felt her heart pounding, but she kept her expression calm and composed. In the audience, she could see her supporters leaning forward in their seats, while the privileged families in the front rows sat with tense expressions. "However," Dean Morrison continued, "one competitor distinguished herself not only through technical excellence but through the power of her authentic voice, the depth of her understanding and the courage of her convictions." The silence in the auditorium was absolute. The winner of this year's Harvard Invitational Debate Tournament, and recipient of a full scholarship to Harvard University, is... The pause felt eternal. Jasmine Johnson of Detroit Public Schools. The explosion of sound that followed was unlike anything Jasmine had ever experienced. The back half of the auditorium erupted in cheers and applause, while the front rows sat in stunned silence. Some people were on their feet, others were crying, and a few were clearly angry about the decision. But Jasmine barely heard any of it. She stood at her podium, tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. She had not only won the tournament but had earned a full scholarship to Harvard University. Everything her mother had sacrificed for, everything she had dreamed of, everything that had seemed impossible just a week ago, had suddenly become reality. Christopher Hamilton was the first to reach her, extending his hand with genuine respect and admiration. "Congratulations," he said, and she could see that he meant it. "That was the most impressive debate performance I've ever witnessed. You deserved to win." "Thank you," Jasmine managed to say through her tears. "You were incredible too. This could have gone either way." "No," Christopher replied, shaking his head. "It couldn't have. You were always going to win this. You had something the rest of us didn't have, a story that needed to be told and the courage to tell it." As the official presentations began, Jasmine found herself surrounded by reporters, college recruiters, and well-wishers. But her eyes kept searching the crowd for the faces that mattered most. She spotted Mr. Rodriguez first, tears streaming down his weathered face as he applauded from the back row. Mrs. Murphy was beside him, beaming with pride. And scattered throughout the auditorium were dozens of other faces that looked like hers. Young people who had come to see if someone from their background could succeed in this elite space. But the most important conversation was yet to come. During a brief break in the celebration, Jasmine managed to call her mother. Carmen answered on the first ring, having been watching a live stream of the tournament at the hospital where she was working. "Baby?" Carmen's voice was thick with emotion. "Did you really?" "I won, Mama," Jasmine said, her voice breaking. "I won the whole thing. And I got a full scholarship to Harvard." The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long that Jasmine wondered if the connection had been lost. Then she heard her mother crying. "I knew you could do it," Carmen finally whispered. "I always knew you were special, that you could do anything you set your mind to. But seeing you prove it to the world. I'm so proud I can't even breathe." "None of this would have happened without you," Jasmine said, thinking of all the double shifts, all the sacrifices, all the times her mother had chosen to believe in her daughter's dreams even when they seemed impossible. "You made this possible." "No, baby. You made this possible. You earned every bit of this." After they hung up, Jasmine found a quiet corner where she could process everything that had happened. The victory was overwhelming, but it was also bittersweet. She knew that her success would be controversial, that some people would always believe she had won because of sympathy rather than skill. But she also knew that none of that mattered. She had proven something important, not just to the judges or the audience but to herself. She belonged in places like Harvard not because of charity or affirmative action or any other external factor, but because she was genuinely excellent at what she did. Ryan found her in her quiet corner, his face glowing with pride and love. "How does it feel to be a Harvard student?" he asked, pulling her into a hug. "Terrifying and amazing and completely surreal," she replied honestly. "I keep expecting someone to tell me it was all a mistake." "It's not a mistake. You earned this, Jasmine. Every single person in that auditorium knows you earned this." As the celebration continued around them, they talked about the future. Jasmine would be starting at Harvard in the fall, pursuing a joint degree in law and public policy. Ryan had another year to complete his undergraduate degree, but they were already making plans to navigate a relationship that would be built around their shared commitment to using their education to make a difference. "You know what the best part of all this is?" Ryan said as they watched the crowd begin to disperse. "What's that?" "You didn't just win a debate tournament. You changed the conversation. There are kids watching what happened here today who will believe for the first time that places like Harvard are for them too. There are adults who will never again assume that excellence and privilege are the same thing." As if to prove his point, a young girl approached them shyly. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old, with the same determined expression that Jasmine recognized from her own childhood. "Excuse me," the girl said quietly. "Are you really going to Harvard?" "Yes, I am," Jasmine replied, kneeling down to the girl's eye level. "I want to go to Harvard too someday. My teacher said kids like us don't usually get to go to places like that." Jasmine felt her heart break and soar at the same time. "Well, your teacher was wrong. Kids like us absolutely get to go to places like that. We just have to work harder and believe in ourselves more than anyone else believes in us. Will you remember me when you're at Harvard?" "I'll do better than that," Jasmine said, pulling out her phone. "I'm going to give you my contact information. And when you're ready to apply to college, you're going to call me and I'm going to help you get there." As they exchanged information, Jasmine realized that this was what her victory really meant. It wasn't just about her own success or even her own education. It was about proving that the American dream was still accessible to anyone brave enough to pursue it, regardless of where they started. The girl skipped away, clutching Jasmine's contact information like a treasure. Watching her go, Jasmine understood that she now carried a responsibility that went far beyond her own achievements. She was a symbol of possibility, proof that excellence could emerge from anywhere, that the American dream was still alive for those courageous enough to pursue it. That evening, as the formal celebration wound down, Jasmine and Ryan walked hand in hand through Harvard Yard. The same paths that had intimidated her a week ago now felt different. She wasn't an intruder anymore, she was a Harvard student with every right to be there. "What are you thinking about?" Ryan asked as they paused beside the statue of John Harvard. "I'm thinking about my mother," Jasmine replied. "About how she's probably still at work right now, cleaning floors and emptying trash cans so that tomorrow she can start planning for her daughter's Harvard education. About how she never gave up on me even when giving up would have been easier. She's going to be so proud when you graduate." "She's already proud. But Ryan, I want to do more than just graduate. I want to use what I learned here to change things. I want to make sure that other kids like me don't have to fight as hard as I did just to be heard." Ryan stopped walking and turned to face her. "You know what I love most about you?" "What?" "You won the biggest debate tournament in the country, earned a full scholarship to Harvard, and instead of celebrating your individual success, You're already thinking about how to lift up other people. Maybe that's what real success looks like, Jasmine said thoughtfully. Not just achieving your own dreams, but making it easier for others to achieve theirs. 3 months later, Jasmine stood in her childhood bedroom in Detroit, packing for her freshman year at Harvard. The room looked the same as it always had. Small, sparse, filled with second-hand furniture and handmade decorations. But everything felt different because she felt different. Her mother sat on the narrow bed, watching her daughter fold clothes and pack books. "You sure you have everything?" Carmen asked for the third time that morning. "I'm sure, Mama," Jasmine replied with a smile. "Besides, I'll be home for Thanksgiving before you know it." "Harvard," Carmen said, shaking her head in wonder. "My baby is going to Harvard." "Your baby is going to change the world," Jasmine corrected, sitting beside her mother on the bed. "And she's going to do it because she had a mother who believed in her when no one else did." They held each other in comfortable silence, both of them thinking about the long journey that had brought them to this moment. Outside the window, Detroit hummed with its own kind of energy, the same streets and sounds that had shaped Jasmine into the person she had become. "You know what the best part is?" Carmen said finally. "What's that?" "That little girl who asked for your phone number at the tournament? She called last week. She wanted to know what books she should be reading to prepare for high school debate." Jasmine smiled, thinking about the shy 10-year-old who had approached her after the championship. "What did you tell her?" "I told her to call you. And I told her that if she worked as hard as my daughter worked, she could go anywhere she wanted to go." As Jasmine finished packing, her phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. "Ready for the next adventure?" She typed back, "Ready for everything." And she was. Ready for Harvard, ready for the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead, ready to prove that excellence and authenticity could not only coexist but could change the world. But most of all, she was ready to carry forward the voices of everyone who had believed in her, everyone who had supported her, and everyone who was still fighting for their own chance to be heard. The girl from Detroit was going to Harvard, and she was taking her community with her. Dear listeners, thank you for joining me on Jasmine's incredible journey from the streets of Detroit to the halls of Harvard. This story is about more than just a debate tournament. It's about the power of authenticity, the courage to stay true to yourself, and the importance of lifting others as you climb. I'd love to hear from you. What moment in Jasmine's story resonated most with you? Have you ever felt like an outsider trying to prove you belong somewhere? What would you have done in Jasmine's position when faced with such overwhelming opposition? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories and experiences matter just as much as Jasmine's, and I believe that every voice deserves to be heard.